In this presentation, we will continue on with our partnership comprehensive problem. We're currently on the financial statements tab. We are making out. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Our adjusted trial balance into the financial statements. In the last presentation, we finished up the balance sheet. And we are in balance. We're going to move on to the income statement now and calculate net income being the bottom line of the income statement. Note that if we do the balance sheet first, as we've done here, we can basically say, what are we doing on the income statement? Because this is the whole story. Notice this is the accounting equation, the balance sheet. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. So what's an income statement to do if that's the whole accounting equation? Really, all the income statement is doing is breaking out this number, telling a story about this number, and only a partial story about part of this number. The rest of the story will be completed with the statement of owner's equity. So we're going back in time. This is like a picture, a portrait. Now we're going back in time and telling the story of how we got to this picture or this point in time or this still frame. So to do that, we're going to break out this information. And note, remember, all of this represents 105,600 total equity. We're going to break out now the income statement portion, which is the bottom portion of the trial balance, these items, and find a home for those. Those consist of just income, revenue, and expenses minus the expenses. Let me try that one more time. It represents the revenue or income minus the expenses or net income. Notice it's already calculated for us here if we have a well-formatted trial balance where the credits are negatives here and the debits are positives. All we have to do is highlight these column in Excel, and that'll give us net income 7,100, 7,100. That's going to be what we will end up with, hopefully, at the end of our income statement. Notice that the income statement will have the date for the month ended as contrasted and opposed to the balance sheet just has a point in time. So that means that's telling us we're telling a story here. We're telling us something that has a beginning and an end. And so that's what these are all timing accounts, in other words. And so the start of our story is just going to be the revenue or income. That's going to go up top. So we're in G20. We're just going to say equals, point to that revenue or income and enter. And that'll just pull that information over. Because there's only one account, we don't need any subcategories. We don't need like any colon or other types of information underneath it. And typically, many companies will only have one or a few revenue or income accounts because we specialize in what we do. On the other hand, everything that we don't specialize in are what we pay for, the expenses here. So that means that because of that, I'm just going to put this in the outer column, not because it's a credit, but because there's no subcategory, so this is basically like summing up the whole category in and of itself in the one number. So what we want to do is flip the sign. It's currently in there as a negative over here, a credit. We don't want credits over here. We want plus and minus information. Therefore, we're going to say instead of equals, negative of that 29,000 and enter. And then we're going to have the expenses. Now the expenses will have multiple expenses and therefore need a subcategory. So we're going to put the subcategory expenses colon, saying, hey, there's going to be a bunch of these and they're going to be listed underneath here. Then we're going to list the expenses. We're in G22 where we will say equals and point to the wages expense and enter. Now they're all the same. All of them are just expenses and they all have debit balances. So I'm just going to go right down the line, do the same thing for equals the utilities and equals the supplies and equals the depreciation and equals the insurance. And one more time, we have to stop this exciting activity, equals the telephone. Now note what's happening. We've got the colon representing that it's going to be indented. It's going to be a subcategory. And then we've got the indentations representing that it's a subcategory. And then we're also going to pull them into the inner column to represent, once again, that it is a subcategory. Now you might have been saying there's an easier way to do this, and there is. So I'm going to delete these and use the autofill just to show another way to do this a bit faster. So I'll delete this. We've got the first one coming from there. So just because it's words rather than text doesn't mean we can't use the autofill. I can still put my cursor on the autofill and autofill down, and it'll take the relative cells. It's going to say, Excel says, I think that he probably wants me to move down one when he copies the formula. And of course I do, that's normally the case. So just got to get used to the way Excel tries to help us out that way. And if we know what it's trying to do, then it does help us out. If we don't, then it can be very confusing. Okay, so now we're in H22. We're just going to pull over the numbers now. Same thing, I'm just going to say equals the wages expense, 6,005. And I'm going to do this again the slow way, and then we'll autofill it. So just to demonstrate where these are coming from. Utilities is here, of course. Supplies equals the supplies. Depreciation equals the depreciation. Insurance equals the insurance. And telephone equals the telephone. Now note, before we do the autofill here, I'll show that with an autofill. Note that obviously this is a pretty simplified income statement. If we had a whole lot of accounts, for example, some companies may have a lot more detail on their trial balance than they want on their income statement. They may have a separate expense account for each region for wages, utilities, supplies. They may, want to combine certain accounts when we get to the income statement because our reader doesn't need that much detail. So note that when we move over to the income statement, we're going to include all these numbers. So in other words, the total should be 21,900, but we may group them a bit differently depending on our needs and how we treat our trial balance as opposed to how we treat our income statement for decision-making purposes. So here we're just going to pull over the same numbers, use the same amounts. Note also that there's a question in terms of order. What should the order be? Oftentimes we'll want the more significant accounts at top. So you could think that, the higher accounts possibly you want at the top. It doesn't have to be that way. There's not a required, order. It's not going to be alphabetical order necessarily. It's probably in some order of significance, but there's nothing written in stone in terms of the ordering of the types of expenses. This is going to be more of a single step income statement as well, pretty quick type of income statement for a service company rather than having a multiple step income statement. Okay, so the other way we could have done this, note that we did the equals the slow way. Now let's do it the fast way. I'm going to delete these, use the autofill just to show us how that can be done. This one is coming from that cell from E24. And then if we click on it and we put our cursor on this little box till it looks like that, not like that, but like that, not like that, but like that, and then autofill it down, left click and drag it down. Auto drives it down, Dr. Phil does the calculations. And once again, it's gonna guess what we want it to do. And as long as we know how Excel works with relationships of cells, that'll work well for us. Now we're gonna once again indicate one more time that this was a subcategory by putting 2 indentations and putting the total over here, the total going in the outer column. Before doing that, I'm going to underline this cell, Home tab, and font, underline, and then we'll sum up in the outer column. So to do that, we'll say equals SUM, double click the sum function, highlight that column of numbers, and enter. So there we have it. So now here's all the expenses. Notice we're only doing things in one column at a time. It's not like I'm jumping over here and then jumping over here. We just got this column of numbers here. Then we're going to have net income is going to be our bottom line number. And again, the net income, we're not going to calculate net income by jumping around. We've already done something here. There's a number right above net income. So I'm not going to go here in this column and jump over to this column and then go back. We only need to do something with one column, this column. And of course, net income is revenue minus the total expenses. So we'll say this equals the revenue minus the total expenses and enter. 7,100, 7,100. We found a home for all these. We can highlight these and say, yeah, 7,100. We can highlight the expenses and say, yeah, 21,900. So that looks good. We're going to say, I'm going to highlight these to indicate we found a home for them and make that a little yellow box to say, okay, we found a home for all those. And we've gotten to the net income. Note a few other things on just the formatting of net income. Notice up here when we had a subtraction problem, like subtracting out the less depreciation, we said that with less. Sometimes some financial statements will put a negative in here, or they'll just use words. But it's not really consistent in all the financial statements. It kind of depends on how much the financial statements think the reader should know a certain calculation. For example, almost never a financial statement doesn't say less total expenses, or put a subtract. We could put a subtraction on all the expenses because they're decreasing to get to net income. But that doesn't typically happen because we kind of assume the reader has seen enough income statements to know that net income is revenue minus expenses, so much so that we have no indication by either sign, negative sign, or the words less. So you got to kind of just get used to how the financial statements will be read in terms of signs that will be in there for types of operations and wordings for types of operations. So now we have everything except for these items. This is part of this story, part of this number. Remember, that number is all of this, 105,600. So we've told the story and found a home, an individual home, rather than just a grouping them all together home here. We found an individual home for all the income statement accounts. We now need to find like an individual home for the capital accounts, and then we will have recreated this number with the income statement and statement of equity. The statement of partners' equity is what we'll do next. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.